Sarah stood at the kitchen sink, her fingers slowly gliding over the damp cloth she was using to wipe down her husband's phone. The evening was quiet, with only the old refrigerator humming in the corner, as if reminding her of the endless routine. On the table lay the remnants of dinner, a plate with an uneaten sandwich and a glass of half-drunk lemonade she had prepared for Jason, her husband. For the past 5 years, her life had revolved around him. Ever since the accident that confined him to a wheelchair, Sarah had become his hands, his feet, and, as she believed, his heart. She changed his medications, drove him to physical therapy, and read him the old detective novels he loved so much. Love had kept her afloat, but lately a crack had appeared in that love. Thin, almost imperceptible, but no less painful for it. Jason's phone, a sleek black rectangle, rested on the edge of the countertop. He had forgotten it after morning coffee, when he hurriedly wheeled himself to his room, muttering something about a call that couldn't wait. Sarah had no intention of invading his privacy. It wasn't her style. But today, something in her stirred. Maybe it was because of his distant look at breakfast, when he barely answered her question about his plans for the day. Or maybe it was the way he had been locking himself in his room lately, closing the door when she entered. She couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was, but a feeling was growing in her chest, like something slipping away, like sand through her fingers. Her hand hovered over the phone, the cloth still damp from the water. The screen suddenly lit up, as if coming to life under her touch, and a notification appeared. A voicemail from her mother-in-law, Marge. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had never meddled in Jason's affairs, never checked his calls or messages. It felt like a betrayal of everything she had done for him. But Marge, that woman, always gave Sarah a slight chill. Her overly sweet smile, her too frequent visits, her excessive questions about Sarah's health. "You look tired, dear," she would say. But there was always something in her voice that Sarah couldn't quite grasp. Sarah's fingers trembled, and almost without expecting it, she touched the screen. The voicemail began to play. Marge's voice, sharp as a knife, cut through the kitchen's silence. Gone was the usual saccharine tone, only cold, businesslike precision remained. She spoke of some plan, saying that Sarah is getting suspicious, and that everything is ready. Money, freedom, a lawyer. Words tumbled out like stones, each one striking Sarah's heart. She felt the blood drain from her face, and the kitchen, so familiar and cozy, suddenly felt alien, almost hostile. What plan? What money? And why did Jason need to keep her occupied this weekend? Sarah set the cloth aside, her hands shaking like aspen leaves. She stared at the phone as if it were a bomb about to explode. Memories swirled in her mind. How Jason had suddenly taken an interest in their finances in recent weeks. How he had asked her to sign some papers without explaining what they were. How Marge had been visiting more often, always with that smile. Sarah tried to convince herself it was a mistake, that she had misunderstood. But deep down, something whispered that she had been closing her eyes to the truth for too long. The kitchen lamp flickered, casting long shadows on the walls, and Sarah suddenly felt small, vulnerable, as if someone were watching her from the darkness. Sarah stood frozen in the dim light of the kitchen, her gaze fixed on Jason's phone. Marge's cold, calculating voice still echoed in her ears, like the remnants of a nightmare she couldn't wake from. "Sarah is getting suspicious. Everything is ready. The money will be ours." Each word cut into her consciousness like a shard of glass, tearing apart the fragile fabric of trust she had woven for so long. Her fingers still trembled, gripping the edge of the countertop to keep from collapsing. The kitchen, where she had made Jason's favorite pancakes with maple syrup countless times, now felt like a cage, its walls slowly closing in. She tried to breathe evenly, but her heart pounded, as if it wanted to break free from her chest. She glanced at the door leading to the hallway. Jason was in his room. She could hear the faint creak of his wheelchair when he moved. Usually that sound comforted her, reminding her that he was near, that she was needed. But now it sent shivers down her spine. What if he knew she had heard the voicemail? What if he was already planning something? Sarah tried to push these thoughts away, but they clung to her like cobwebs. She remembered how, a couple of weeks ago, Jason had asked her to sign some documents, calling them a formality for insurance. She hadn't read them, trusting him as always. Now that trust seemed naive, almost foolish. The phone on the table flickered. Another notification. Sarah flinched as if it could bite her. It was a text from Marge. Delete the calls. She's too trusting to suspect. The words hit like a slap. Trusting. The word burned her, making her feel small, vulnerable, like a pawn in a game whose rules she didn't know. She knew she had to do something, check the phone further, find more evidence. But fear paralyzed her. What if there was something else that would shatter her world completely? She cautiously picked up the phone, her fingers sliding over the smooth screen. The call log showed names: Marge, a few unknown numbers, and Dr. Wilson, the doctor overseeing Jason's condition. Sarah frowned. Wilson had always seemed professional to her, a bit dry but reliable. Could he be involved too? She opened the voicemails, and her eyes caught another one from Wilson, sent a couple of hours ago. Her thumb hovered over the play button. She knew that pressing it might cross a line from which there was no return. But curiosity, or perhaps desperation, proved stronger. Dr. Wilson's voice was calm but tinged with tension. He spoke of adjusting the dosage and that she won't suspect if it's done gradually. Sarah felt the floor slip from under her. Dosage? For whom? For Jason? Or for her? She remembered how, over the past few months, she had felt increasingly exhausted, how headaches had become her constant companions, how she sometimes mixed up words, blaming it all on stress. Could it not be a coincidence? Her gaze darted to the bottle of pills on the shelf, her own, prescribed by Wilson for migraines. Her stomach churned with horror. The creak of Jason's wheelchair grew louder, and Sarah froze, her heart pounding wildly. He was closer than she thought. She quickly turned off the phone and slipped it back onto the table, trying to steady her trembling hands. The kitchen, with its smell of lemonade and warmth from the stove, now felt like a trap. Sarah knew she had little time. She had to decide. Pretend nothing had happened or dig deeper, risking everything. But one thing she knew for sure: something in her life would never be the same again. Sarah stood, pressed against the kitchen countertop, her fingers still shaking from the voicemail she had just heard from Dr. Wilson. Adjusting the dosage. She won't suspect. Those words spun in her head like a broken record, making her nauseous. She looked at the bottle of pills on the shelf, small white capsules she had been taking for months, trusting they would help with her headaches. Now they seemed like poison disguised as salvation. Her gaze darted to the hallway, where the creak of Jason's wheelchair had gone silent. But the quiet was even more terrifying. She felt like a cornered animal, unsure how much time she had before he noticed the phone was still in the kitchen. Her thoughts tangled, returning to the past few months. The exhaustion that weighed on her like a heavy blanket. The dizziness she attributed to lack of sleep. The moments when she forgot where she left her keys or what she had just been talking about. She had blamed herself, thinking that caring for Jason was draining her. But now those symptoms painted a horrifying picture. Were they poisoning her? And for what? Sarah recalled how Jason had insisted on updating their insurance policy a couple of months ago. He said it was for their shared security. But she had signed the papers with barely a glance. Her heart clenched with shame for her blind faith. She picked up the phone again, her fingers moving quickly, as if afraid to reconsider. In the list of messages from Marge, she found another, short and sharp. Friday, Phase 2. Keep her distracted. Friday. That was the day after tomorrow. Sarah felt cold sweat on the back of her neck. What was supposed to happen on Friday? She opened Jason's conversation with an unknown number where there was only one message. The documents are signed. She won't find out. Her throat tightened, as if someone had slipped a noose around it. Documents. The insurance? Or something worse? The kitchen began to feel like a trap. The walls covered with photos of their happy days, their wedding, the trip to Lake Tahoe, his smile before the accident, now seemed like a mockery. She remembered how, at their last meeting, Marge had looked at her with pity, but there was something predatory in her eyes. Sarah had brushed it off, thinking she was imagining things. Now she realized it wasn't just a look. It was a mask-hiding calculation. The creak of Jason's wheelchair sounded again, closer, and Sarah nearly dropped the phone. She quickly slipped it into the drawer with the kitchen towels, trying to breathe quietly. Her gaze fell on the clock above the sink. 8:35 p.m., May 28, 2025. Jason would soon ask for his evening tea, as always, and if she didn't act as usual, he would suspect something. But pretending, knowing what she now knew, was beyond her strength. Her mind screamed to run, but where? To whom? The police? A friend? Or dig deeper until she found answers? She took a step toward the door but stopped, hearing Jason cough in the hallway. Her heart froze. If he came in and saw her face, pale, with eyes wide with horror, he would know she knew. Sarah forced herself to pick up the kettle and fill it with water, though her hands shook so much that water splashed over the edge. She had to buy time to figure out what to do next, but deep down, she felt every minute in this house was bringing her closer to the abyss. Sarah stood frozen at the sink, the kettle trembling in her hands as water slowly filled it. The sound of running water drowned out the buzzing in her head but couldn't silence the fear that entangled her thoughts like a web. The voicemail from Dr. Wilson and the text from Marge still burned like hot coals. Phase 2. The documents are signed. She won't suspect. These words formed a dark mosaic, but Sarah still couldn't see the full picture. She knew one thing. Her life, so familiar and stable, was crumbling, and every second in this house felt like a step toward the edge of a cliff. She placed the kettle on the stove, trying to gather her thoughts. Her gaze fell on an old framed photo on the windowsill. She and Jason at a fair in their first year of marriage, laughing, holding cotton candy. Back then, he was different. His eyes glowed with warmth, not the cold detachment she saw now. Or had she imagined his love? Sarah felt a lump rise in her throat. For 5 years, she had given him everything, given up her job, her friends, her dream of opening a coffee shop. And for what? To become a pawn in his and Marge's game? The creak of Jason's wheelchair jolted her out of her stupor. It was close, and Sarah flinched, nearly knocking over the kettle. She glanced back. The hallway was empty, but the shadows from the lamp trembled, as if someone were moving around the corner. She had to act. Jason's phone was still in the drawer with the towels, and she knew there might be answers there. But checking it now was too risky. Instead, she thought of Jason's room, his office, as he liked to call the small bedroom cluttered with papers and old books. He spent hours there, locking the door when he made calls. Maybe she could find something there to explain this nightmare. Sarah wiped her sweaty palms on her jeans and took a deep breath. She had to pretend everything was normal to buy time. The kettle whistled, and she poured boiling water into a mug with chamomile tea, Jason's favorite. Her fingers trembled as she stirred in the honey, and every sound in the house felt like a threat. The creak of floorboards, the distant hum of a car outside, even the ticking of the clock. She glanced at the bottle of pills on the shelf. The thought that they might be part of a plan to weaken her made her nauseous. But throwing them out or stopping taking them would be too noticeable. She had to be smarter. She picked up the mug and headed toward the hallway, but stopped at the door, hearing Jason's quiet voice. He was talking on the phone, his tone low, almost a whisper. Sarah pressed herself against the wall, trying not to breathe. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was sharp, impatient. This wasn't the Jason who asked her to read to him before bed or thanked her for dinner. This voice belonged to a stranger. Her heart ached, but anger began to break through the fear. If he and Marge were plotting against her, she wasn't going to give up without a fight. Sarah returned to the sink, setting the mug on the table. She needed to get into Jason's office while he was distracted. But how? He was always on guard, especially lately. She remembered how he once left the key to his desk drawer on the kitchen table, a small silver one, almost unnoticeable. Maybe it was still there. She started rummaging through the drawer with forks and spoons, her fingers shaking with haste. Nothing. But time was running out. The clock showed 8:40 p.m., and soon Jason would call for her, expecting his tea. Sarah knew that every step she took now was a dance on the edge of an abyss, and one wrong move could ruin everything. Sarah stood in the kitchen, clutching the mug of chamomile tea, which was already starting to cool. Her heart pounded so loudly that she feared Jason might hear it through the walls. His whispered voice from the office had gone silent, and the quiet hung in the house like a heavy fog. She knew this was her chance, perhaps her only one, to get into his office and find something to explain what Phase 2 was and why Marge and Dr. Wilson spoke of her as an obstacle. But every step toward the hallway felt like a leap into the void. If Jason caught her, she didn't know if she could talk her way out. She moved quietly toward the door, stepping softly to avoid creaking the old floorboards. The hallway was dark, with only a faint light slipping through the crack under the office door. Sarah remembered how Jason once joked, calling that room his den, where he planned the future. She had laughed then, thinking he was dreaming of new books or a trip when his health improved. Now those words sounded sinister, like a mockery of her trust. Her fingers tightened on the mug. She still held it like a shield, in case she needed to pretend she was just bringing tea. The office door was slightly ajar, just a couple of inches, and Sarah peered inside. Jason sat with his back to her, hunched over the desk cluttered with papers. His phone lay nearby, its screen glowing, but she couldn't make out what was on it. She noticed a stack of envelopes with the logo of their insurance company, the same one on the paper she had signed without reading. Her stomach twisted. She recalled how Marge, sitting at their kitchen table, had casually mentioned that insurance was a guarantee of stability. Now Sarah saw it as nothing but a lie. She took a step forward, but a floorboard betrayed her with a creak. Jason froze, his shoulders tensing. Sarah held her breath, feeling the blood pound in her temples. She expected him to turn around, his eyes, usually so familiar, filled with suspicion. But he only coughed and continued writing. Sarah exhaled, though her legs trembled. She knew she had to act fast. She slipped into the office, staying in the shadows, and her gaze fell on the desk drawer. If the key was anywhere, it was likely there. Her fingers slid along the edge of the drawer, but it was locked. She glanced at Jason. He still hadn't noticed her. On the desk lay a bundle of keys, among them the small silver one she had seen before. She reached for it, but at that moment, Jason's phone buzzed, and the screen lit up brighter. A notification from Marge. Check that everything is ready for Friday. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Friday was tomorrow. Whatever Jason and Marge were planning, time was running out. She grabbed the key, careful not to jingle the metal, and inserted it into the drawer's lock. The click was barely audible, but to Sarah, it sounded like a gunshot. She froze, expecting Jason to turn around, but he was too absorbed in his call, which, judging by his tone, was growing more tense. Sarah opened the drawer and saw a folder labeled Insurance, Sarah. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a policy for $500,000, with Jason listed as the sole beneficiary. Her name, Sarah Wells, stood next to a sum that made her throat tighten. This wasn't just a document. It was a death sentence. Sarah stood in Jason's office, her fingers trembling as she clutched the folder with the insurance policy. The $500,000 figure, written in black and white next to her name, felt not just like a number, but a brand that Jason and Marge had placed on her life. Her eyes darted around the room. Shelves of books, an old globe, a photo of their honeymoon on a Malibu beach, where she laughed and he hugged her shoulders. Now that memory was like a knife in her heart. How could she have been so blind? 5 years of care, sleepless nights, and sacrificing her own desires, all for a man who, it seemed, saw her only as a means to get rich. The creak of Jason's wheelchair snapped her out of her daze. He had finished his call, and the silence in the room was almost tangible, like the calm before a storm. Sarah quickly shoved the policy back into the drawer, trying not to make noise, but her hands shook so much that the folder nearly slipped. She closed the drawer, but the key stuck in the lock. Her heart stopped. If Jason noticed the drawer was open, he'd know she had been snooping. She yanked the key with force, and it finally came free, clinking louder than she wanted. She froze, listening. Jason coughed, and his chair creaked as if he had turned toward the door. Sarah pressed herself against the wall in the shadow of the bookshelf, her breathing so quiet she could barely hear it herself. She saw his silhouette. He was looking toward the door, his face in half-darkness, but his eyes glinted like a predator sensing prey. She prayed he wouldn't notice the slightly open door or her shadow. At that moment, the phone in the kitchen, which she had left in the drawer, let out a sharp beep, probably a new message. Jason flinched, his hand jerking toward the wheelchair's wheels. Sarah realized she had seconds to act. She stepped toward the door, moving silently, but her foot brushed a stack of books on the floor. They fell with a dull thud, and Jason spun around sharply. His voice, usually soft when he called her, was now sharp, almost threatening. He asked where his phone was, and there was something in his tone Sarah had never heard before. Cold alertness. Fear gripped her throat, but she forced herself to respond, mumbling something about wiping it down after spilling juice and leaving it on the table. Her voice trembled, and she hated herself for it. Jason nodded, but his eyes narrowed, as if trying to read her thoughts. He wheeled toward the kitchen, and Sarah slipped out of the office, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst. She rushed to the kitchen table, grabbed the mug of tea, and set it in front of him, trying to look calm. But inside, she was on the edge. The policy, the messages, Wilson's voice, all confirmed that Jason and Marge were planning something terrible. Maybe to poison her for good, or something even worse. She remembered how Marge once mentioned a new life for Jason, and now those words sounded like a sinister hint. When Jason took the mug, his fingers brushed her hand, and Sarah flinched involuntarily. His gaze lingered on her a moment too long, and she knew. He suspected something. The phone was in the drawer a few steps away, and if he opened it, he'd see she had listened to the messages. She needed to run, now or never. But run where? The police? Her friend Emily? Or try to find Dr. Wilson and shake the truth out of him? The clock showed 8:45 p.m., May 28, 2025, and each tick felt like a countdown to the end. Sarah knew that if she stayed, she might not survive. Phase 2, Sarah stood in the kitchen, her fingers still gripping the edge of the countertop as Jason sipped his chamomile tea. His gaze, cold and probing, bored into her, as if trying to crack her thoughts open. She forced a smile, but her face felt like a mask about to shatter. Inside, everything screamed, "Run." The $500,000 policy, Marge's messages, Wilson's voice about dosage, it all pointed to a horrifying truth. They were poisoning her, slowly but surely, to get the money. Her own pills, taken for headaches, now seemed like the weapon of her destruction. Every sip Jason took from his tea felt like a countdown to when he'd noticed the phone in the drawer or realized she knew too much. She glanced at the clock. 8:50 p.m., May 28, 2025. Time was slipping away like sand through an hourglass. The phone in the drawer with the towels was a ticking time bomb. If Jason opened it and saw she had listened to the messages, the game would be over. Her eyes darted to the car keys hanging on a hook by the door. They were always there, a habit from countless trips to Jason's physical therapy. Now they were her ticket to freedom. But running without a plan was terrifying. Where to? Emily's? The police? What if Marge and Jason had bought someone off there? The thought that she could trust no one squeezed her heart like a vice. Sarah remembered how Emily, a nurse who had always been there in tough times, once told her, "If something goes wrong, just come to me." Emily lived 20 minutes away, in a Seattle suburb, in a cozy house with a porch where they used to drink coffee and laugh over old-school stories. Now that house seemed like the only safe place. But to get there, Sarah had to escape this house, where every shadow felt like a threat. She looked at Jason. He was finishing his tea, his fingers tapping the mug, his eyes still watching her. She felt like a mouse under a cat's gaze. She needed to distract him. Sarah turned to the sink, pretending to wash dishes, but her hands shook, and a plate nearly slipped. She mumbled something about needing to grab laundry from the dryer in the garage, hoping it sounded mundane enough. Jason nodded, but his gaze didn't soften. She moved slowly toward the door, feeling sweat trickle down her back. The car keys were in her jeans pocket. She had grabbed them when he wasn't looking. Every step toward the garage felt like a leap across a chasm. She imagined Jason wheeling after her, his chair creaking, his voice calling her with that fake tenderness that now made her sick. In the garage, Sarah closed the door behind her and pressed herself against the wall, her breathing ragged. The car stood in the corner, an old blue hatchback they had bought before Jason's accident. She rushed to the driver's door, her fingers shaking so badly that the keys nearly fell. When she finally unlocked it, a shadow flashed outside the window. A black SUV, unfamiliar, with tinted windows, slowly driving past their house. Her heart froze. It could be neighbors, but her gut screamed, "It's them! Marge, or someone she hired." Sarah climbed into the car, slammed the door, and inserted the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and she pulled out of the garage, keeping the headlights off to avoid attention. The road ahead was dark, and in the rearview mirror, she saw the SUV turn around and follow her. Sarah gripped the steering wheel of her old hatchback, her knuckles white from the strain, as she sped through the dark streets of a Seattle suburb. The headlights of the black SUV in her rearview mirror burned like a predator's eyes, relentlessly trailing her. Her heart pounded, drowning out the engine's hum, and her thoughts tangled like a fever dream. The $500,000 policy, Marge's messages, Dr. Wilson's words about dosage, it all confirmed that Jason and his mother weren't just planning to steal money, but might be aiming to get rid of her for good. She recalled how she had felt weak lately, how her thoughts muddled, how Marge watched her with fake concern, offering yet another pill. Now, it didn't seem like a coincidence. The dashboard clock showed 8:55 p.m., May 28, 2025. The road to Emily's, her only hope, was still 10 minutes away, but the SUV wasn't giving up. Sarah turned onto a narrow street, hoping to lose it in the residential maze, but the headlights reappeared, closer than before. Panic squeezed her chest, but anger, hot and fierce, began to burn through the fear. She had given Jason 5 years of her life, and he and Marge had turned her into a target. That thought fueled her, pushing her to press harder on the gas. Her phone, lying on the passenger seat next to the crumpled insurance policy folder, buzzed. The screen lit up, a call from an unknown number. Sarah hesitated, but curiosity won. She put it on speaker, and Dr. Wilson's tense, hurried voice filled the car. He said he hadn't known the full truth until that evening, that Jason and Marge were blackmailing him, threatening his family. He had found fake medical records proving her pills were poison and had sent them to her email. "Go to the police, Sarah. They want to finish this tonight." His voice cut off, and the line went dead. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. Finish this tonight? So, Phase 2 had already begun. She glanced in the mirror. The SUV was closer, its engine roaring like a beast. Sarah swerved into an alley, tires squealing, trash cans flashing in the streetlight's glow. She remembered how Emily had once shown her a shortcut through an old commercial district, narrow streets where she could lose a tail. She yanked the wheel, barely missing a parked car, and the SUV vanished from sight for a moment. But the relief was short-lived. Its headlights emerged from the darkness again, and Sarah realized they knew where she was going. Her phone buzzed again, a message from Marge. "Come back home, Sarah. Don't make this harder." The words, so simple and cold, sent shivers across her skin. Emily's house was close, its warm lights visible at the end of the street. Sarah imagined knocking on the door, Emily's kind eyes and resolute nature helping her sort this out. But the SUV was too close, and Sarah knew that if she stopped, they'd catch her. She remembered Emily once saying about her hospital job, "There are always people around. No one would dare touch you with witnesses." The hospital was farther, but maybe safer than Emily's house. Sarah gripped the wheel, her resolve hardening. She wasn't going to give up. The road ahead split, left to Emily's, right to the city hospital. She had to choose, and fast. Sarah sat on a hospital bed, her hands still trembling despite the warm blanket a nurse had draped over her shoulders. The chaos of Seattle's city hospital buzzed around her. Nurses hurried with charts, carts squeaked, and doctors' voices echoed in the distance. It was 9:30 p.m., May 28, 2025, and time seemed to finally slow down after the frantic chase. An IV drip in her arm slowly administered an antidote, flushing out the sedatives that, as tests now confirmed, had been undermining her health for months. The crumpled insurance policy documents, still smelling of her sweat from the chase, lay on the bedside table, and an email from Dr. Wilson with the fake medical records was open on a nurse's tablet. These were her evidence, her salvation. Police filled the emergency room, their radios crackling as they took statements. Detective Rivera, a woman with tired eyes and a stern voice, sat across from Sarah, jotting down every word. Sarah told her everything. Marge's voicemails, Wilson's recordings, the insurance policy, the chase, the threats. Her voice trembled, not from fear but from anger. Anger at Jason, who had looked at her with such love while plotting her destruction, and at Marge, whose fake concern masked greed. The detective nodded, her face growing grimmer with each word. She confirmed that Wilson, who had survived an attack, had already given a statement, revealing how Jason and Marge blackmailed him by threatening his daughter. The $500,000 policy was just part of it. They were siphoning off a $1 million family trust, using Sarah's illness as a distraction. Emily stood beside her, squeezing Sarah's hand. Her live stream on social media, started the moment Jason and his hired men burst into the hospital, had gone viral. Thousands saw Marge trying to feign concern while Jason shouted that Sarah was just confused. But the camera caught their faces, their panic, and it shattered their game. The police acted swiftly, arresting them on the spot as the crowd in the emergency room filmed it all on their phones. The video spread online, and now Sarah's name was all over the news. Seattle woman uncovers husband's plot. It was a strange feeling, to be in the spotlight when all she wanted was to reclaim her life. Sarah looked out the window, where the city lights twinkled in the night. She remembered how she and Jason had once dreamed of opening a coffee shop, sketching plans on napkins in a cafe. Now those dreams were ashes. But in those ashes, she found sparks of strength. Detective Rivera said Sarah's house was secure, and their savings with Jason would be restored after the investigation. The trust, stolen by Marge and Jason, was frozen, and the trial promised to be swift. Jason faced up to 25 years, Marge up to 20. Wilson, as a coerced accomplice, might get a suspended sentence for cooperating. When the police left, Emily brought Sarah coffee, and they sat in silence. Sarah felt exhaustion wash over her, but it was a different kind. Not the suffocating fatigue of recent months, but a cleansing one, like after a long run. She had survived betrayal, a chase, fear. Months later, she began writing a blog, sharing her story to help others who felt trapped. The trial was ahead, but Sarah knew she had already won. She looked at Emily, smiled, and for the first time in a long while felt she could breathe freely. The night outside was dark, but in it, the light of a new life was already dawning.